All right. Well, we are actually live on my channel right now, so it's fine. People on my channel are very, very patient. There's been a lot of exciting stuff happening in the news, I'll tell you what.
Did you want me to lock this?
You don't have to, dear. Love you guys.
Okay, we're live on Periscope.
All righty. Say hello to my little friend.
And we're about to be
live on Periscope.
We're already live on Periscope.
Okay.
Say hi.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. I'm Truepowerismine.
I'm Dimebag Darley.
This is the other morning show. We're waiting for YouTube to get live on Dimebag TV, and we're going to do the show. We have a special guest on the Truepowerismine hotline, and we will be doing this in a few moments. 1 second.
You ready?
Right. Yeah, I'm ready. Just had to give my better half a kiss. Goodbye. That's all. She has domesticated me. For all you single guys out there, the quickest way to a longer life, get married.
All right, we're live on YouTube, Periscope,
Yes.
on Dimebag TV, and on YouTube on Truepowerismine. Welcome to the other morning show. I'm Dimebag Darley.
I'm Truepowerismine, and we have Dr. Jacqueline Battalora on the line.
First of all, you got the
yeah. I want to say some thank yous out. I want to thank Jim from Buffalo for your $50 donation to the show. I want to thank Terrence from Madison for your $10 donation, and Samantha from Vandalia for your $30 contribution to the show. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And today, our guest is she's an attorney, professor of sociology and anthropology and criminal justice at St. St. Xavier University in Chicago. She's an anti-race writer, educator, and trainer. She teaches courses in law and society, having received her PhD from Northwestern University. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jacqueline Battalora. Doctor, are you there?
I'm here. Thanks for having me, y'all.
Thanks for coming.
Yes, thank you, thank you. So,
now, as I was going over a little bit of the your background and some of the things you talk about, and I thought it was pretty fascinating, your background. Can you just tell our audience where you from and give them a little more information about you?
Sure. So I don't know where I'm from. I was born in Europe, Scotland, and my dad was a chemical engineer, so we just got transferred regularly, constantly. So I moved around a whole lot, and ultimately by middle school landed in Victoria, Texas. And so I guess I call that, home growing up. I did most of my growing up there from middle school through high school. And then I've been up in the Midwest ever since in, undergrad, law school, college, and career.
Okay. So tell us, how was your experience in Texas when you were in middle school and high school?
Well, I had learned about race in the way that it has taken shape in this country, really from visits to Chicago. My grandparents, my mom's parents, were from Chicago, Cicero and Chicago area. They were in the Lithuanian community of Cicero, which today is a largely Hispanic community. And so when we would come visit my grandparents, we lived in Belgium at the time, and we'd fly up here for a couple weeks over the summer. And those were my first lessons about these people who were darker skins than me. And they were the lessons were very clear. There was nothing but negative attachment that I learned about when it came to persons of African descent. So those are my earliest memories. And then, of course, when I moved to southern Texas, I also learned very quickly about the racial hierarchy, my place in it. I went to a school that was pretty diverse. And even in that context, I was very aware very quickly of where my place was as a white person and other folks as Hispanics, and we completely erased tribal people, and which is fitting, right, for the history, and then persons of African descent. But I had the distinct life pleasure of falling in love with a person of African descent when I was a young person. And so, that probably did me into life.
The old adage, once you go black, you never go back. So did you ever notice that? What's that?
I was just going to say we remain very, very close friends. And I think when I think of best friends in your life, he's definitely the one.
Yeah.
Hold on.
We're having we're having a hard time hearing you on your phone.
Can you hear me now? Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry, folks, but that audio was. You hear us now?
Much better. Thank you.
Much better. So we will. We just got to move our little microphone so the audience can hear you better. So hold on. All right. Now, what we were talking about, I was about ready to ask you, did you notice some of the people who were giving disparaging remarks to melanated people were also doing the same thing to women?
Of course. Absolutely. I learned the gender hierarchy as fluidly as I learned a racial hierarchy. Gotcha.
Because of the fact that misogyny and racism go hand in hand, because they're, in my analysis, they're both similar to mental illness. They're a sickness, and it has to end. It's time for us to come out of the drudgery that we've been in and start being one humanity. Because there's only one race on planet Earth, and that is the human race.
That is exactly right.
Now, can you tell us about your experience with the Chicago Police Department?
Sure. Well, I only spent three years as a Chicago police officer, and I was an officer after I had a PhD and a law degree.
Okay.
Maybe I'll tell you why I went that route as an intro to this, but I was a graduate student at Northwestern, and one Northwestern student, Mark Luff, was the same old story. It wasn't as pervasive in the news back then, in the late 90s, but unarmed African American Northwestern undergraduate student shot and killed. And the next day, an African American woman, Sonia Haggerty, again shot and killed, unarmed, by Chicago police. And I was just at the point of completing my dissertation, and I, was specializing in studying the history of race conflict and race constructs in this country. And, I wasn't getting job offers in places where I was wanted to live. So I thought, I'm teaching criminal justice students at UIC, so maybe I should go take the police exam and hopefully it'll make me a better DJ professor. So I did that, and the next thing I know is some Chicago police officers who were in the LGBT community show up at my front door and say, Jackie, come, why don't you just keep going through and maybe there'll be some real opportunities in the Chicago Police Department to make a difference. And so I did. I went to the academy, and I had hoped that I might get to bring my training and skills into the department, beyond my, what I carry around just individually, hopefully to get to do something institutionally institutionally and structurally. But it became. I learned pretty quickly. I'll tell you the final moment. I mean, there were many. Of course, I have lots of examples. I can tell you stories about the gender problems within the police department, race problems within the police department, and I'm happy to share my experience there. But it's all fairly typical, I think. But my police career ended when I had an interview at the law division of the Chicago Police Department, and the lieutenant said, you have more legal experience than most of us on this floor. And at that point, I had been lucky enough. I had the opportunity to clerk for the Ohio Supreme Court Justice. I had worked in misdemeanor court and at a corporate law firm, so I had a really wide range of legal experience by this point. And but he told me, the lieutenant said, "But I can't do anything for you unless you can make a phone call." And I didn't know anybody higher up or have family members or political connections, so that was my last day in Chicago. I realized I am not going to be able to. I'm not going to be allowed really to bring my contributions here, so I moved on.
Oh, okay. Okay. So let's talk about your book, Birth of a White Nation: The Invention of White People and Its Relevance Today.
Well, while I was in graduate school at Northwestern, I was doing research at the law library downtown, and I was looking at legal restrictions on marriage historically, and I was going back and back and back and back in time. And at some point, this label for a group of humanity vanished, the one that I had clicked off on government and medical forms my entire life, and that was white people. So when I was completing my dissertation, I took note of the fact that there, this category wasn't always there, and I didn't have a chance. I completed my dissertation, went on and worked, and then in my academic career with St. Xavier University. and rendered enslaved before arriving to the coast, the shores of North America. And enslavement was for life. So that's a huge difference. But in terms of treatment on the same plantation, there was no hierarchy. Persons of African descent and European descent worked together, ate together, slept together. And the only division on the plantation was gender, so that women who were enslaved and indentured lived in the same space as men in a different space.
So was it?
Furthermore,
so is it true to say that
free men of African descent and free men of European descent, and the vast majority of the people in the colony, by the way, were British men. So that's why I'm usually referencing British instead of Europeans. But there were some other folks in Europe as well. The records reveal people from Portugal, for example, Ireland and Scotland. There was some Dutch. But the vast majority were British, and the vast majority for men. In fact, the gender imbalance was roughly 10 to 1. So that also gives a big picture. So what we know is that free men of African descent and free men of European descent had the same rights and privileges as a matter of law. And so let me break that down. That meant that free men of African descent could vote, and they did. They could own enslaved persons of African descent, and they did. They could own indentured servants, European servants, and they did. They could run for public office. I can't find in the historical record evidence of anyone who chose to do so, but by law they could. And they could marry a woman, a person of the opposite sex, regardless of her ethnicity or nation of origin, and they did. So, and people always say, well, wait, if persons of African descent were enslaved for life, how could you have free black men, free men of African descent? And here's what the historical record reveals about that. We know that there were, it was not insignificant to have a free person of African descent in these colonies at the time, and they were able to achieve their freedom either by purchasing their own freedom through side jobs. Many of the first persons of African descent who came to Virginia in 1916, and the first group were, we believe that they came from Barbados, which was already a British colony, and so many already spoke English and were already familiar with British culture. And so they had lots of skills that enabled them to make some money on the side so that they could purchase their own freedom and that of family members. Another thing that we see in the historical record that led to free persons of African descent was the trusts and wills of large landholders. And it was through those instruments that persons of African descent also were freed from enslavement. So that's what the history reveals, and we know that. In fact, I can't remember the name of a county in Virginia, but half of the men of African descent, half of the free men of African descent in that county were married to British women. And when you think of that gender imbalance, roughly 10 men for every woman, that's a pretty significant piece of historical information. So this is the life, the social context that exists that most of us don't know about. I mean, when I talk to people about the history, whether I'm talking to judges, lawyers, academics, undergraduate students, high school kids, or junior high kids, young people are very unaware of this early North American colonial history, where persons of African descent had the same rights as a British indentured servant who was free of indenture. Well, I guess he wasn't indentured anymore. A British person free of indenture. So most of us, I certainly didn't learn that growing up, and was really surprised. So here's what we know happened. In Virginia, there was a huge rebellion called Bacon's Rebellion, named after the man who led it, Nathaniel Bacon. And there were two motivations for this rebellion. He was furious with the ruling elite in Virginia because a few of his British neighbors were murdered, and he believed that they were murdered by tribal people that surrounded the Virginia colony. And he was angry that the ruling elite didn't respond violently towards the tribal people. So that was one of his main objections. And his other main objection with the ruling elite is that at this time, by the 1670s, indentured servants began to be treated much more harshly. Laws were passed that imposed really harsh punishments and extensions of term of indenture for really minor infractions. And so the masses of people, the 99% in the colony, were being treated much worse. And even if they were lucky enough to complete their term of indenture, their opportunities to make it on their own had narrowed dramatically. The economy was based on tobacco farming. The cost of tobacco had fallen. The king had increased taxes. The king gave most of the good land in the colony to his buddies, so there wasn't even much good land to find purchase. So things had just become all around really challenging, much more difficult for the masses of people in the colony, the 99%, I like to refer to them as.
Right.
But some people in the colony were doing extremely well, and that was the 1%. And so Nathaniel Bacon was furious about this. And so he didn't have to look hard to find a lot of disgruntled laborers.
Mm-hmm.
So he ended up leading this massive rebellion, the first part of which focused on attacking tribal people to punish them for what he saw as a murderous act. And then they focused their attention on the ruling elite, burning and pillaging and punishing the ruling elite. And ultimately, I mean, so the rebellion was huge, first of all. It lasted well over a year. Nathaniel Bacon died pretty early on from a fever subsequent to wounds he received. And then British sent in troops from England. So this was huge. And ultimately, the rebellion was quashed. But we know from letters that the lawmakers in the British colonies, and not only lawmakers in Virginia, which is primarily where this rebellion took place, but also lawmakers in other British colonies, were completely panicked because their situation was similar, especially Maryland, because it was also a colony with an economy rooted in tobacco farming.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like Virginia, there were tons of workers, of laborers, both enslaved and indentured, relative to the landholding elite. You know, so they were far outnumbered, literally the 99% versus the 1%. So they were panicked because of Bacon's rebellion. And we know this. Theodore Allen does this tremendous analysis of letters going back and forth between the lawmakers in Virginia and other colonies and the legal oversight authority in London. And it's in these letters that he reveals that the lawmakers in Virginia communicate to the legal oversight authority in London, don't worry, we've got this under control. We're going to pursue, in essence, a divide and conquer strategy. And so here's what's happened. As soon as the rebellion's over and subsequent to these communications, lawmakers start to pass this big bundle of laws. And the laws radically transform colonial society, and the society that they turn it into is one that you and I are much more familiar with. Because the truth is, we're still living with its consequences, its effects. And so here, I'll give you just an example of a few of the laws that were passed. So there was a law passed that made it illegal for white people to marry persons of African. Well, the language in the law is marry enslaved Negro men. And this law of 1681 that was passed in Maryland is literally the first time there's a reference to a group of people called white people. So that helps us to see that this assertion of an invented group of people called white people came about for a very specific purpose. And that purpose is to divide us, to divide the 99%. Another law that was passed made it illegal for persons of African descent to testify against white people.
Wow.
And so if you just look at that one law, the law that made it illegal for Black people to testify against white people, what did white people learn about what it means to be white that day?
Wow. What I get from it.
The message for this newly invented group of humanity is that you have authority over, dominion over, a voice over persons of African descent.
Right.
That's exactly what it is.
You have to. That's only shocking if you remember that before this law, it was a completely different world where persons of African descent and persons of European descent lived the same lives, had the same rights and opportunities, with the important caveat that enslavement was a laboring condition of persons of African descent and indenture for persons of European descent. So colonial lawmakers radically transformed society. They passed the law that made it illegal for Black people to testify against white people, illegal for white people to marry Black people and then tribal people as well. They passed laws that required indentured European servants to be paid goods upon completion of a term of service, including gun and powder. And they made it illegal for free Black men of African descent to be in possession of a gun or powder. So completely transforming colonial society. So what they did was, through the invention of white people and the assertion of their superiority relative to persons of African descent and tribal people, what the ruling elite did was they invented this group of laborers, now called white people, who now felt some sort of connect with the ruling elite that they had never experienced before. And what was the connect was the presumption of shared superiority, so that this new group of laborers called white laborers became something like the ruling elite. So the construct of whiteness was to create a feeling of sameness with that ruling elite and differentness from persons of African descent and tribal people. So the ruling elite didn't have to give these white laborers, they didn't have to hand over any of their resources to reorganize society and to appease, to manage, maybe appease is not the right word, but to manage the 99% and keep them from rebelling against the 1%. What they did was they dug out a bottom to colonial society and shoved people of African descent and tribal people in that pit, which is now a much lower bottom to colonial society. And so that's, white people were offensive. That we didn't experience a genetic shift in 1681 when we first see the appearance of white people in law that now connects all of us to us called white by some genetic sludge that we can call white. It's ridiculous. Of course, that's not the case. There's no biological connection to race. It's an invention. It's about power. It's about power and control.
Doctor, I hate to interrupt you, but I need to call you right back.
And the remainder of the book is all about U.S. history and how whiteness worked throughout our country's history to confer advantages to white people and disadvantages that are unearned to non-white people. And I can give you one more quick example historically. That law that made it illegal for Black people to testify against white people, we know that law worked for their purposes because we see it throughout U.S. history.
Right.
For example, after 1848, when lots of Chinese men were brought over to work to build the railroad and the scan for gold out west, in those states, the courts ruled that Chinese could not testify against white people. And following the Treaty of Guadalupe and Hidalgo, when the U.S. virtually doubled in size and Mexico chopped in half, in many of those regions where a large number of Mexicans lived, we saw the same thing. Mexicans, laws were passed that made it illegal for Mexicans to testify against white people. So if you think about the impact of that law, it worked to keep the people excluded from testifying. It made them or pushed them toward being passive to white people, right, for fear of their own safety. And it also worked to ensure that those groups would remain cheap and dependent labor.
And it's a, you can see the effects of that. You can you hear me, doctor?
I was going to try to call you back on a different line here because the audio on this side is horrible. Can you hear me?
She's still on the line.
Well, hopefully she'll pick up.
Hello?
Hello. Hey, it's us again. I'm sorry. I had to call you on a different line. But the audio is a lot better now.
Okay, let me hang up on the other line. I got you on.
All right. Thank you. That should be somewhat better. Sorry about that, folks. Once again, this is the Other Morning Show. So we have issues like this, but we fix them.
Awesome.
Yes, that's a lot better. Lot better. Once again, Dr. Battalora, I am terribly sorry for this technical difficulties. We're a struggling talk show, but we're here to get the truth out.
Okay, back to the law of 1681, and I see that the effects of that right today, where you can take the poorest, most uneducated white person, and they would still think that they're better than the most educated and rich black person, just on the simple fact that they're white. To where in reality, poor black people and working class black people have just as much in common with poor white people and working class white people. And I see what you're doing is effective in trying to help people realize that there's more common ground than you think. Because I think at the end of the day, it's the 1% is against all of us.
Yes,
absolutely. Well, the 1%. The 1% has benefited from, ever since the close of the 17th century in North America anyway, has just continued to benefit from this invention of people called white people, because white people have, the 1% hasn't had to do much anymore, right? Because white people, laboring white people, those of us who have to get up and go to work every day, we've taken the mantle of dividing ourselves from other people like us who are in a similar situation to us by virtue of the fact that we have chosen to believe we're superior to those people. So we've divided the masses for now, centuries.
Yes. And
you see it in labor studies when we learn labor history. Black people weren't allowed to join unions, women weren't allowed to join unions. We shoot ourselves in the foot constantly.
Even if they were allowed to join unions, there were certain apprenticeships they could not indulge in because it was by design. And the origins of the union was after slavery was over, you had all those black tradesmen that knew about construction, knew about mining. They were building their own cities. So they had to put it into all that by coming up with this ideal of unionized work.
the mechanisms of exclusion and unfair passage granted to white people is truly extraordinary.
It is, and
the problem is we don't learn it, right? Okay, so here's my. I believe that you said we're focused on sort of a young audience here, so let me see if this works. This is my take on the K through 12 U.S. history that most of us got. It is analogous to my mom asking me on a Friday night, pretend I'm in high school, Jackie, what are you doing tonight? And I say, Mom, I'm going to my friend Sarah's house, my closest friend, and we're just going to hang out with some friends. So that's the version of history that we get in K through 12. And let me just fill in the rest of the story. So that's not a lie. I am going to my friend Sarah's house, and I'm going to hang out with friends. But guess what? There's about 300 other people who are coming. We have a bunch of kegs, some crack cocaine.
Oh, God.
And that's what's going on. So I didn't lie per se to my mom, right? So what we're told in K through 12, most of it is not lies per se, but it is nothing close to the truth.
It's a watered down version of the truth.
Well, let me use a Star Wars analogy. Truth is relative. Did Darth Vader kill Luke's daddy? Or
it's more than relative. It's fate.
Right. So
it's purposefully shaped.
Yes, and the purpose of the shaping is to destroy young people's minds so that they will basically self-police themselves and not even try to succeed because they have in their minds, I cannot succeed anyways.
And so much more. Yes, we are kept passive, good little workers in this country. We show up. We have a what's become a fraudulent election system, and instead of saying hell no, we just sit back. I mean, we have our education system has functioned to create passive and little robot soldiers.
Yeah, right. We're mindless drones.
Yeah, because I've learned more. I've learned more by reading a few books on history compared to what I learned my whole time in school.
Because school does not teach critical thinking skills. They do not teach you to look at the world objectively and see your course and plot a course through. Because every human is like a ship. If you're a ship and you don't have a navigator and a captain to guide you, you cannot go nowhere. If we turn on the motor on the biggest yacht in the biggest harbor and just let it go without direction, it's going to crash. It's going to go and run asunder on rocks. That's your life, kids. You better understand there is a history that got you to the point that you're in. Now it's up to us to learn this history and plot our course and go accordingly.
Absolutely. And we need the historical knowledge.
Yes.
Look, what's so disturbing to me about so much of the history that is taught in K through 12, and I also want to acknowledge that there are some amazing K through 12 history teachers who do promote critical thinking, but they are by far the exception. Yes. And they manage to do that despite the contents that are required to impart on their students.
When I was younger, I actually heard a history teacher. I was a janitor at a elementary school when I was 18. And I heard this history teacher basically say the Southern cause was the righteous cause. He was at Athena School in a district here in Missouri. But the point was we have basically like enemy spies, agents for, dare I say, white supremacies that is indoctrinating the youth to believe these horrible ideals, these ideals that are really degrading all of humanity. We need to understand that if we could take that term, white supremacy, take out white and interject human, and then it would be perfect until we actually are able to leave the earth and go out and encounter other cultures. Because if we show the love that white supremacists have for themselves to all of humanity, oh man, we'll be a force that would be unstopped.
I get your point about us all being humanity, and that is the key. Absolutely. I would never use white supremacy, however, as a model. White supremacy is, and I don't even know that white people really love themselves. It's a structure of fear, right?
That's what I think it is.
It's a terrible model. Don't use that as your model for good humanity. There's better ones out there.
Well, hold on. Tell us one. Tell us one, Doctor.
I got your point.
No, tell us a better model.
I got your point.
Tell us a better model.
Well, you know.
No. Tell us a better model that has conquered the world in the way that white supremacy has conquered the world. Tell us a better model that we could use.
Well, if you want to model, look at how white supremacy has conquered the world by demeaning, by sidelining, by I can't think of my word. I'm completely slaughtering people. I mean, that's not a model that we want to follow.
But if we interject,
the world, but look at how. If you want to, I think anyway that you're proposing a conquer by love, by truly being one humanity.
Right.
We don't have a damn model for that. Let's make one. It's this generation. You all who are listening to this, show us this. Let's make this model. We can do it.
Yes. And the way we can do it is by acknowledging the worth of even the lowest human being that truly loves humanity. Now, there are some human beings that do not love humanity, and we know who they are: the sociopaths, psychopaths, and ones who are basically sort of like the John Birchers, who are following the book of Revelation. They want to incite the self-fulfilling prophecy of the Messiah, the Messianic Messiah coming back to earth and killing off everybody and blah, blah, blah. But there's no happy ever after. Right. We have to understand we are all in this together. My freedom is directly tied to your freedom, Doctor. I'm willing to die for your freedom so that you will, hopefully willing to die for my freedom. And that what makes us strong as a American cohesive unit, because I am American. I was born here in Missouri. I only really know America. And, as a descendant of a slave, I have no other country to basically retreat to. This is my homeland now. I know how it was founded. I know what it took to get here, but there's no place for me to go. And a lot of Black people need to understand this is 1928 and the Nazi fascist mechanisms coming to power. But the way that they can do it nowadays with automation, they can kill people at such a rate that the Nazis would have blushed. We better get on board and understand, if we do not turn this tide of hatred and genocide and eugenics, then they are going to destroy us. They will kill us all the melanated people in America, because this is like a family issue. We are the shame of past crimes. Our physical presence is a real representation of past breeding forms, past master raping the slave girl or the child or the man. And all this has a cumulative effect on the way we carry ourselves today. A lot of people, well, why is this Black guy going from woman to woman to woman to woman? Well, how do you know that his DNA didn't come from one of those breeding farms? A lot of those Black bucks, as they called them, were there to produce Black pups for the slave industry. We have to understand these things, and we have to see how they are a tangible, really, you can actually feel it, effect on Black people's lives in America today. Now, all this nonsense, well, my ancestors came over in 1918 and they did great. Well, your ancestors probably came from Scotland or maybe Norway or France or England or European country, so they could assimilate into this racist society in which they find themselves in. We have to change this, because
yes, we do.
I don't want to see a flip-flop. I don't want to see where, the more melanization you have in your skin, the more superior you are. Or the less melanization you have in your skin, the more superior you are in this present situation. We got to understand everybody brings something to the table. Literally, everybody does. We wouldn't have reached the moon if it wasn't for a collective effect of all the races and all the best of all the races. Now, this ideal of best and worst needs to be changed as well. You know, who is determining the criteria for who is superior or who is inferior? That's why I'm against abortion on a fundamental level, because think about it. I was born in 1972. In 1972, my mom at the time had 7 children. She could have totally, I don't need another one, and I would not be here today. Therefore, the show would not be going on. Well, think about this. Since I've been born, 63 million children were killed. All right. This last election, Donald Trump won by what, 3 million people? I'm sure the Democrats or whoever could have got the 3 million they needed in the 60 million aborted children that have died since I've been on this earth for 45 years, before they were even allowed to be alive. See, humanity has a certain hubris to believe that we can actually foretell or predict the future. We cannot do this. It's outside our grasp of understanding. So therefore, all I'm saying is, let's give life a chance. Let's give this planet a chance. Let's take away the power from these corporate conglomerates. Let's take away the power from all these individuals who want to destroy our earth for future generations. That's all I'm saying. You know, am I a climate believer? No. I know the earth has gone through changes for millions of years.
So, doctor, so you give training courses on
Yeah, I lecture largely. Most people bring me in to share the history of the invention of white people, and to talk about evidence of its impact in founding U.S. law. So that's what most people bring me in for. But I also do, you know, trainings, and
because when I was
lecturing is
when I was doing research on you, and I came across some videos, and I thought it was, because some of the stuff you were saying, I had no idea about this stuff, and I thought it was pretty fascinating. And especially when you had started talking about the Bacon's rebellion and the law of 1681, you know, I didn't even hear about that until I saw one of your videos. So I know they're not teaching this stuff in school.
No, and I'm actually working with a writer at Northwestern creative writer, and we're going to see about this illustrator in France. We just all know each other, so we're trying to work together to produce a book that for a 5th grade audience, targeting a 5th grade audience, that through the historical story of a real British woman who was brought to this country as an indentured servant, who lived through this period in Maryland of the invention of white people. And actually, she's the grandmother of Benjamin Banneker, who's a famous African-American. But through her story, we are trying to help 5th grade teachers be able to teach better history to our kids, because that's when they're first learning about colonial North America.
Right.
Now, you
so
mentioned
that's one of the projects I'm working on right now.
You mentioned earlier the white people and black people being enslaved at the same time. Now, were there breeding farms for the white folks as the same as the black folks? And did they get whipped the same as the black people did?
No, you know what? Most of us have the image of slavery in this country after the historical period I'm talking about, after white people were invented.
Okay.
Here's what the historical evidence reveals about the treatment of African people and British people on the same plantation. It was the same. They were treated the same. The evidence reveals that. Now, look, there are, if you go back in the historical record, there are efforts on the part of the 1%, not not among the masses, but the 1%, of efforts to treat persons of African descent in a more negative way. There's a legal case where the judge imposes a sentence on the Scot and the Dutchman, I believe, and to the person of African descent who says you are enslaved. I've been dying to dig into this case because it's referenced a lot by, it's just referenced regularly, and it's often referenced as proof that there was this general animosity toward persons of African descent.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm telling you, among the masses, among the 99%, the vast majority of who were British, they didn't have that. There is no evidence of it.
Right.
None. There are little bits of evidence on the part of the 1%, but they are few and far between. And they're important. They are important, though, because they are the seeds that lead this nation toward the invention of whiteness as superior and the absolutely inhumane treatment of persons of African descent. I mean, so that historically they're important, but I think that you also have to fold in the evidence relative to the 99%. Otherwise, the 1%ers get to tell us history, and that's not accurate.
Well, they often sponsor the people who are writing the history books. But my question is, in your research, did you ever discover any direct evidence that links the King James Version of the Bible to basically white supremacist agents wanting to subvert said Bible translation to their cause?
Don't know. I'm unfamiliar with that.
Maybe you should check that out to see if like elements of white supremacy was purposefully injected into the King James Version of the Bible to ensure that people who will be indoctrinated with said Bible would subscribe to their role in the white supremacy ideology.
I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. I mean, we have lots of evidence of, distortions of Hebrew text.
Give us an example.
White supremacy. There's all kinds of evidence. I mean, you have rulings written by judges that reference God and God's intent to divide people by colors, and it's ridiculous. It's craziness, but it's
horrible. That's absolutely appalling. That people will use spirituality to provoke a physical discrimination of a certain group of people.
Well, that's how that's how they keep the poorest of the poor at each other's throat while they steal all the resources. See what I get from what the doctor explained is one of the main reasons why they even in the law of 1681 was even created was as a distraction. We get these two groups of people that have common cause to go at each other's throat, and we'll be over here on this side stealing all the wealth and resources.
Absolutely. We have not been focused on the 1% ever since. We had a little blip in more recent history with the Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah,
there was like a little blip. Yeah,
and right to this day, it seems like people, 40% of descendant of slaves kids in this country go to bed hungry at night. And probably around anywhere between 12 to 20% of white rural kids in this country go to bed hungry at night. And then their parents, I feel like, their parents on both sides, they're kind of at each other's throat, or, as long as this don't come into my boat or directly affect me, then there's no problem with it. But I don't understand how people cannot see a problem with this when you live in the richest country in the history of the planet. But the mechanism from this law is in full effect.
That's right.
And it just seems like, and another thing is, it's like how, like they during the crack era, they build all these jails and stuff when the crack cocaine was through the 80s and 90s. I grew up in the 90s, so I know in St. Louis City, So I know it was crackheads all over the place.
Thank Iran-Contra.
And then when I moved, I had lived in Southern Jefferson County for about 16 years. And with the when the opioids was injected into rural America, I saw the same thing as I did when I was a kid in the inner city going on with the crack as I see in rural America with the heroin and the opioid and the crystal meth epidemic. You see the tweakers all over the place, but they don't advertise that. They only show, they'll be quick to show more what a person of color is doing and how they're all on drugs and stuff, and they build prisons and throw them in prisons. But since now that the heroin epidemic is got into the suburbs where people that got money, it's a what they call it, a medical issue.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a healthcare issue.
Yeah.
But you know what? Here's the thing: is what the disparity that you're raising to the surface here between how we as a nation, when you think about our resources, how we responded to the crack epidemic. Well, there's two parts. There's how it was framed by the media and politicians, right? Those black people making those choices.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So incarcerate was where all of our resources went. And then today you have an opioid epidemic, and the primary population that's impacted are wealthier white people. And so how are we responding? How is it being framed? These people have an addiction. It's a healthcare issue. We need to help these poor people. It's not their fault that they're making bad choices, which is how it was framed with crack. And how are our nation's resources getting deployed toward healthcare treatment, toward life saving, not incarceration. So that's evidence of to me of how white supremacy has damaged white people. Mm-hmm. We are incapable because of white supremacy that we are born into in this nation. It makes us incapable of seeing people of color as fully human.
Right.
And the evidence is everywhere. The evidence is in the crack versus opioid. It's in, you think about Freedom Summer during the civil rights movement when black people went missing and were killed and were lynched with some regularity.
Yeah.
The national media didn't care at all, and certainly no federal resources were put toward addressing that. It's not like any of those people who participated in the mob or the extra legal killing called a lynching were prosecuted. None of that happened. But when two young white men go missing,
they send the feds.
Cheney and an American, then what happens? Oh, the FBI, the National Guard, the media's all over it. We've always cared about white people, and to varying degrees, right? Being poor and white makes you less, certainly has an impact.
Yep.
Gender shapes it, sexuality, religion, all of those things shape it. But even within those variations, this country has always cared about white people.
Right. And I feel like even with the law of 1681 and how it plays a big role in it today, the way it seems like it's set up, if a few white people have to be sacrificed just to make sure everything stays in order to continue the treatment of other people, they're willing to do this. Because if you look at it, like, they Republicans use this tactic. They convince especially poor white people to vote against their own best interests, and by saying that they're going to get rid of all these social safety nets because these group of people over here are taking your money. But then when that said white person that voted for this Republican, where he loses his job and needs some government assistance, it's not fair because he helped vote for the person and put them in the office that took that away. So when the 1% come taking their resources, then or they fall flat-footed or need some help, there's no resources for them to help them get back on their feet.
I know. It's a really the ways in which white supremacy has harmed the 99%, it continues to harm all of us, and it's overwhelming when you see how we have participated in harming ourselves,
right?
Because we are so invested in that hatred.
Yeah, and it's crazy.
But the reason why they're investing in the hatred because there's an economic and social benefit to promoting the hate.
Only to a group of people.
No, no. Like I told the doctor when we first talked, when me and my wife Debbie got together. All right, we went to Walmart. She had went up there millions of times before I showed up in the picture. She was able to go and use her grandmother's check and get whatever she needs to do, done, right? Mm-hmm. I'm standing there, and I didn't tell. It was Jane Elliott that I told the story to. I was standing there, and all of a sudden, the cashier needed to verify with grandma. She needed to call grandma, call the bank, and on all this rhythm and roll. There is a benefit to not associating with Black folks, even on the bottom level, and they don't want to give that up. You know, I've always asked the questions. If things were flip-flop, would you be willing to give up your privilege so that another human being can come up? I would.
I just want everybody to be treated equal and be able to compete on the same level field.
I don't even want to compete because to compete is a fiction anyways. You know, our monetary system that was created in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Act. This is a straight up hijacking of our economic system, which our economic system directly impacts your ability to live a so-called normal life in this country.
I don't know. I'd rather be living a comfortable life than poor, dirt poor, and just ignorant and hating on somebody else, and I don't even know them.
But that's the point. You don't get that.
The majority of the people,
choice is always determined.
The majority of the people in this country. I'm gonna say the majority of white people in this country that's racist and don't like that's bigots because they ain't racist because a lot of them ain't got the resources to affect another person. They're poor. Mm-hmm. They're completely poor. Instead of banding together, they got the same complaints as people with color in this country do, but instead you'll rather suffer and live below and poverty and all this stuff because your set skin is lighter than this person.
But we got to understand.
Right.
Oh, you can go, doctor.
Well, I was just going to say, David, the historian from y'all's neck of the woods there in Missouri, David Roediger writes quite a bit about this, the wages of whiteness and sort of how counting as white had its own sort of reward. Even if you're dirt poor, at least you weren't Black.
Whoa. I never heard of this David guy. Doctor, could you please, after we get off the show, I want to contact you again, and could you put me in contact with him to bring him on the show?
I can give you his name, and he's been at Mizzou. I think he's still there.
Okay. I will research him. I'll skip trace him.
You should know about him. Yeah, his work is really important.
Oh, this state is ran by whack job Republicans, so they're gonna hide all that stuff. They didn't.
Not all Republicans are whack jobs.
They didn't just straight hijack the legislation in Missouri. It's
in our state, unfortunately, you can be fired from your job even if your boss or your manager is a hardcore racist. You can be fired for your job without any reasons. It's the law now, so it's sad.
Yeah,
Missouri, even where I used to work.
Gentlemen, I'm gonna have to sign off soon. I just wanted to thank you for having me and thank you for the work you're doing. And all the people who are listening, keep learning, dig in, take out a book, turn off the TV.
Yeah. Thank you, Doctor, for coming on and dropping some knowledge on us.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to be with y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jacqueline Battalora, get the book.
Yes.
Get the book. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Welcome. Bye, guys.
Bye. Birth of a White Nation and the Invention of White People and How It's Relevant Today. That's the book by Dr. Jacqueline Battalora. Pick that up. You may learn something today, folks.
Yes. Now, to complete this show, once again, I want to tell you, all my listeners.
Sorry about the audio.
Sorry. Totally sorry. But we rectified it in the second half.
Yeah.
But you know, the issue here, folks, is are we going to live ununited or are we going to live united?
If we live ununited, we're going to all get put in that meat grinder, period.
Yes.
So,
one person at a time.
Yep.
But if we live united, you can be free, he will be free, and I will be free.
And we all can be free.
That's where we need to be.
And live on this mud ball in peace and not going to bed hungry at night.
Yes. But, that requires effort. And, like I said, on the show, if we took that word white supremacy and took out white and put in human, we would have human supremacy and we would have everyone working together.
Yeah, but the 1% like, no, we can't have that. Not without a fight.
No.
Not without a fight, folks.
Fuck no.
We're
because
not going to
of the
do
fact
this.
that there is power in division.
Yep.
As long as I can keep you divided, I can control both factions.
And it was one thing I forgot to bring up when the doctor was on, and it's like, it's not many black people in this country. You think about overall population. It's not many of us. So eventually they're going to start putting their boots on other people's necks too.
Right.
They're going to start squeezing. You can only squeeze so much money out of us. We don't have much as it is. We
got enough to 40% of the population is enough to make 3 or 4 billionaires.
Shit. Now, when you greedy, with Bezos got 100 billion by himself.
That's what I'm saying.
Somebody else is finna get squeezed.
For every billionaire, there's at least 1,000 homeless.
Shit, it's more than that.
At least. So the reality of this deal that we're facing is if you do not choose to make a change, if you feel that you're in the majority and you want to stick with that, that's cool. But like my departed mama said, whatever goes around comes around. And what Dr. Battalora and what Jane Elliott's talking about, when script flips and it's black on top, do you really want to be getting, the boot on your neck? No, you don't. What you really want is for us to hold hand in hand and work together. That's what you really want.
I just know it's enough resources in this country for everybody to live a comfortable, decent life.
Not only this country, this whole fucking world.
This whole planet.
This whole fucking mudball.
So,
the reality is this. It's up to you to make a change.
Yep.
It's up to you. Not us, but you.
I just want to say thanks for watching the content. Mark from Anaheim will be on the show tonight
at 6 p.m. Central Time.
So if you got any questions, you can go to the other morning show, 17@gmail.com. Leave some questions, what you want us to ask Mark, or you can leave them in the comments on this. And
we got a new Truepowerismine hotline. This is it. As you can tell, the audio got quite.
Right, we had to downgrade. We thought we upgraded.
Yeah, we thought we upgraded. We got that, and that's what we got to do in society. You think you upgrading with this hate? You need to downgrade with the love.
So I'm Dimebag Darley.
I'm Truepowerismine.
Peace.
Peace.
Don't talk back to the police.
Yeah,
might get kicked in the stomach.